Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and in this video I was wanting to show you all kind of a overview installation as well as a SD card setup of the GC Loader for the GameCube. Now in case you do not know, the GC Loader is a brand new ODE which was announced and released pretty recently. An ODE is an optical drive emulator, and in short, what this does is this allows you to open up a GameCube, remove the original disk drive or drive assembly, so to speak, and replace it with a printed circuit board, which from there allows you to load up all of your homebrew as well as your GameCube games from a SD card or even a micro SD card with an SD card adapter. Now yes, you can play all your GameCube games from a backwards compatible Wii or the VWii on the Wii U or even a emulator such as Dolphin. So why would you do this on the GameCube? Well, there's a bunch of different reasons, some of them just for nostalgia purposes, some of them because people might like the form factor, and others for even just wanting the authentic hardware that it was originally running on and using something nice for the output such as a GC HD to get that really crisp digital HDMI output while still utilizing native hardware. Now I figured this would more be a fun video for people to check out because this was originally going to be a tutorial where I was going to go in depth and show everything with the installation. However, the GC Loader not only sold out quite fast but was even quickly succeeded by the GC Loader PNP. I will leave a link down below in the description where you can buy it from the manufacturer's site, but the GC Loader was originally a solder-based solution, which you are going to see the soldering here, and it's pretty simple to do if you know how to do some soldering. However, it was succeeded, and for $10 more, you can now get the GC Loader PNP, which allows you to take apart your GameCube, much like I'm doing right here, and without any type of soldering, you just remove the disk drive, and then plop in the GC Loader PNP, reassemble, and you're all ready to go after that, making something already simple and easy to do even simpler and even easier for just $10 more. If you're looking for some actual assistance on how to get it all set up after you have a GC Loader PNP installed, the good news is the setup and upgrade process in terms of software is going to be the exact same between GC Loader and GC Loader PNP. So for anybody who might have a GC Loader PNP board installed or you are looking to install it, you can actually check out the timestamp down below in the description, and it will show you exactly how you can set up your SD card, get the formatting proper, and even upgrade your device. So first of all, you do need a GameCube for this, and you can use any model of the original GameCube. And I'm not talking about the Panasonic Q, that is a different thing entirely, even though it does play GameCube games, but this does work on the Dole 001 models, which have digital AV output, and the Dole 101s, which do not have digital AV out. Now some people might be asking, does my GameCube have to be modded in order to do this? And there's two answers to this. The first one is a simple no, and the second one is no, nor do I recommend performing this on a modded GameCube. If you're using an action replay disc of some kind to boot up into homebrew, you're no longer going to need that because we're replacing the DVD drive, and once we do this mod, you can't use that again unless you put the DVD drive back in there. As for anybody that has a hard modded GameCube, I would actually recommend taking the disk drive that you have modified, because it's the disk drive itself that is modded, and putting that to use in another GameCube, or purchase a stock GameCube and can continue to do this modification on there, because you cannot use a GC Loader and a mod chip all in one. Now as you can see, I've been taking apart the GameCube right here, and there's a couple things that you'll need for this. You'll need a Gambit screwdriver as well as a size 0 Phillips head screwdriver. It doesn't hurt to have smaller bits just in case you want to take it apart further like I was doing here, because I also decided to take the heat shield off just so I can install a region mod on here as well, but those are really the two different bits that you need. Now with the GameCube taken apart, let's see what we got here. We got some screws, nuts, and washers, which we're going to need later, and we also have the GC Loader PCB with the flex cable. Now fun fact, you could use the flex cable, which I'm going to be using here, or you could have even taken out a connector from a DVD drive for the GameCube and solder it onto the PCB itself, so that way you would have a plug and play solution without waiting for the plug and play. That is kind of redundant to have now since the plug and play is the only option, but I digress, that's also what several people did with this install. Now you do need to take the GameCube motherboard out of the plastic itself, and ignore my 2 wires, those were just for a region mod that I did later on, but right here you do need to take out the motherboard, flip it over, and kind of to where I was pointing at, that is where the flex cable is going to be installed. It just needs to go cleanly over this. Now the install for this was pretty easy. Again, once you find the area the flex cable goes, it fits on there perfectly. You just have to make sure it is nice and flat, and I also recommend using some good flux. I was using no clean flux, but you could also use Kingbo flux or what have you on here. Now all I really had to do was make sure, again, this was nice and flat on the board. I was holding it down, and the first thing I did was lock it into place. So with that, you can just take 1 or 2 points in a few corners and just lightly solder them in. I was able to do that right there with 1 point. I go over to the other point, and this doesn't have to be good. This just has to be enough so that the cable is not going to move around everywhere. And as you can see, it already started moving, so I was using my finger a little bit to keep that held down. But once that's all done, you can really just go and fix up your points and continue on kind of in a assembly line fashion. And again, this was thankfully pretty easy to do. You kind of just go from point to point and solder it up a little bit, and then you can flux it again if you really need to. Now there were a few times where admittedly I did mess this up by soldering 2 points together and bridging them, which is as simple as just going in and heating up the 2 points and removing that solder manually. All I really had to do for this was use my soldering iron, solder, and I had to flux a few more times. And that was about it. So I'm going to kind of speed up this process here. At one point my hand does cover this up a little bit, so maybe this might not have been the most accurate tutorial, but this part is pretty easy. Kind of right here, once you get those 2 points locked in, you kind of just have to go assembly line and keep your soldering iron a little bit clean, and just solder in each point and make sure you're making a nice joint connection. Now finishing it up here, I just did this all by hand as you can see, but that's about all I had to do, and this process took 5 minutes to install this cable, so it really didn't take me all too much as someone who had never done this before. So at this point, I just took some isopropyl alcohol and a few Q-tips and cleaned up the area as best as I could. It was already pretty clean, but you just don't really want a bunch of excess liquid there, so kind of just clean it all off, clean up your work, and make sure it's dry enough to continue. So this is one modification on the GameCube, which thankfully plug-and-play owners shouldn't have to do anymore. This was a little bit annoying, but it was still easy enough. So as you can see, when you install the GameCube motherboard back in, you very quickly run into an issue. Not only the flex cable kind of has some pressure on it, but it is going at a point where a screw is supposed to go into. So what's the solution? Well, let's just prevent a screw from ever going into there again. This next part of the process did require me to remove the bottom plate here that was installed, because we do have to do a slight modification. Admittedly, my version's a little bit janky. I did not use a Dremel or anything. However, Dan, otherwise known as Citrus 3000 PSI, the developer, or one of the main developers of this board, actually recommended using this method with just, some pliers and scissors, and it can get done. I mean, hey, as long as we can get the job done, awesome. I want to play some GameCube games. So right here with everything ready for removal, that is the exact screw peg that we're going to be removing. And I just removed it by cutting it off with some flush cutters and then kind of trying to cut it to a flush point, so to speak. You know when you take something apart and then when you're putting it back together, you end up having some screws that you know should be inside of the system but are in your hand? Yeah, that happens here, and that's totally normal. So putting it all back on, as you can see, we are not to put a screw there anymore, but we still want to kind of cut this off to make it clean. So all I did was use some flush cutters to cut into the metal a little bit further, and then you can use some pliers to extend that out and make it nice and flat. And then from there you could either use flush cutters or you can just use a pair of household scissors to cut off that little tab in the corner. Again, on this particular model of the GameCube, the one with your GC loader, we're never going to be putting a screw in there again, so it really doesn't matter. But the nice thing is, with the plug-and-play solution, we're never going to have to do this. You don't have to do any of this right here. So have fun checking this out. Now with that all nice and cut, it doesn't look pretty, but it does get the job done. We can put that back onto the bottom of the GameCube itself, screw it in, and that's really all we need to do. As long as it's not going to be invasive with the flex cable or touch it or cut it up or anything, we'll be perfectly fine. So now at this point, I'm just dropping the GameCube motherboard back in here and kind of eyeballing it. But as you can see, once we drop it in, the goal of this is to have the flex cable sit cleanly there. It's not hitting a peg, it's not hitting any of the shielding. That is exactly what we are looking for. So with that done, we can just continue to reassemble this and get this all hooked up. So the actual GameCube itself, the motherboard itself, is perfectly fine. We no longer have to do any work to it. Now we have to do the rest of the work on the disk drive itself. And yes, even though we are removing this, we are going to be repurposing the bottom piece of metal right here that connects onto the rest of the GameCube, because we're going to be putting the GC loader on top of that. So this is just as simple as removing a few screws and then accessing this. Now right here, this is the only piece from the disk drive we need. The rest of it is still probably good if you have a functioning GameCube, so I recommend keeping that to the side to maybe use in another GameCube another day, or in case you ever want to revert to this. But right here, we just need that bottom piece, and we have the GC loader that we're going to be working with. Now the GC loader is going to look a little bit something like this, and we're going to be messing with all the screws, the washers, and the nuts. Now, the unfortunate thing is I actually ended up misplacing one of the washers here, so my install is one washer short. But this is pretty simple to do. You kind of just put the screws in, put the nuts in, and then you do need to use a couple of the washers. Again, one of my washers is missing, but I've used this thing for quite a bit at this point while recording the video, and all seems to be well and good, so fingers crossed this GameCube should hopefully be fine. Now, once we have the GC loader prepared, we just need to take it and plop it on top of the metal piece like so. Just make sure that you line up all three of these screws with the holes, and from here you can just go ahead and drop the nuts on, screw it in, and you shouldn't have to mess with it too much further at this point. We're nearly done. So from here, awesome, grab the rest of your GameCube, take your newly installed GC loader with the metal attached to it, and put it in like so. I do have to finagle with the wires a little bit because of my region mod, but that's about it. And again, a lot of this gets skipped thanks to the plug-and-play solution, but again, I wanted to buy it earlier, so I made it a little bit hard on myself. But that's all good because it was still a pretty fun install. But from here, yeah, you kind of just work on getting everything screwed back in. So here, pretty much the very last thing is to make sure we do not put a screw in that empty screw hole. That is to stay empty. If we put a screw there, we are going to destroy this flex cable that we worked so hard to install. But right here, it's as simple as releasing that latch on the GC loader, flipping the flex cable, and then making sure it is clamped down and holding on to it. The only thing you really need to look out for at this point is when you put the top of the GameCube on, make sure you're really not touching or crushing, especially the flex cable. It really shouldn't be possible, but I don't know, people can surprise me. I'm sure there's people who have installed and ruined their flex cable that way. Now really the last thing you need to do is take your SD card, pop it into the GC loader, and turn it on. And it should be working. If you kind of have a thing where your GameCube just shows a black screen, it might mean that your SD card is not configured. And speaking of that, let's get into the configuration. It's quite simple to do. So setting up the SD card for GC Loader is easy, and in fact it is so easy that I'd recommend you do this before even doing the installation. So when you order your GC Loader, I actually recommend you get started on your SD card immediately. Due to the fact that backing up your games is going to take time, but even if you get a large SD card and fill up with your favorite games, copying everything over is going to be a lot more time consuming than installing the actual device itself, believe it or not. So with this, what I'm going to do is demonstrate it by using a SD card here. I have a 64 gigabyte, and the hardest part of this is really going to be formatting. Now the GC Loader will need a FAT32 formatted SD card, so you can just right click this, go to Format, and select FAT32. This is the problem though you might run into. If you have a large SD card, you won't be able to format it directly to FAT32. So we'll just need to download a few things. So I am on Windows, but for this I'm going to use FAT32 Format, one of my favorite little programs to use. For this, the link will be down below in the description. You can just click on this image right here, and then simply select where you're going to be saving it to. Next up, we should also download the latest copy of Swiss, so you can just go to, again, this link down below in the description, and scroll down and find the latest build available of Swiss. You can just simply download this 7-zip file. And the last thing we'll need, just in case your GC Loader is on an outdated version or you want to update it, you can always use this method to update it. Come over here and download the latest firmware for the GC Loader. At this point while I'm recording it, it is 1.0.0. Before we continue formatting, make sure any data you care about has been backed up off of this SD card, and once you back it up, close out of any type of File Explorer windows that you might have. And now open up GUI Format by right-clicking and running as administrator. From here, make sure you select the correct drive. This is the one I want to format. The default allocation size is fine, and I'm going to rename this to GameCube, and a quick format is fine. So I'm going to press Start, OK, and it has now formatted my SD card to FAT32. Now with this formatted, I'm just going to double check the properties, and it is FAT32. So to continue on, you can just open up the SD card, and for the firmware file, copy that directly to the SD card. And that's how it should look. For any of your games, just as simple, copy directly over to the SD card. Now, what if you have a game such as Resident Evil 4 or even Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes that is 2 discs? Well, guess what? That is just as simple. It doesn't matter what they are named or any of that fun stuff, they just need to be together in the same folder. And yeah, that also includes the root of your SD card. So even for multi-disc games, just grab all the discs, copy, and paste them to the root of your SD card, and it is that simple. This is actually quite a new feature that has been integrated into the most recent builds of Swiss. If you're playing a multi-disc game and you have to get to a disc swap, as long as you have both of the discs in the same folder or directory of each other, then you'll be able to swap discs with no issue. And again, just to stress how awesome it is, it does not matter how you have them set up or how you have them named. As long as you have them together in the same directory, Swiss will do the disk swap for you. And finally, I keep talking about this thing called Swiss. What is this? Well, this is one of the best pieces of homebrew, if not the best piece of homebrew, the definitive homebrew in my opinion for the GameCube. For this, once you download it, all you need to do is use something such as WinRAR or 7-zip to extract it. You can right click it and just extract it here. Now simply go into the newly created Swiss folder that was extracted, go into the ISO folder within Swiss, and then you're just going to need the ISO for the region GameCube you have. For this, I'm going to grab the NTSCU ISO because that's the GameCube that I'm using after I've switched regions. So I'm just going to copy this out, and just like everything else, you paste it directly into the SD card. Now there is one last change we need to make. You will need to rename your Swiss ISO to boot.iso, and that is it. Now with the way GC Loader works, any game you have that is called boot.iso will automatically boot up when you turn on the GameCube. So it's recommended to use Swiss, but for example, if you want to play Resident Evil 4 as soon as you turn on your GameCube, you can rename this to boot.iso, but you don't really need to because it's better to just open up Swiss and then select Resident Evil from there, or whatever game you're going to be playing. But this is exactly how your SD card needs to be set up. If you're not seeing any of the extensions right here, you can simply go into Folder and tick File Name Extensions. But this is all we have. We have Swiss, we have the latest update, and we have all of our games. So with that, I'm just going to go back here, safely eject the SD card, and pop it into your GC Loader, then turn on the GameCube. Now once you have your SD card plugged in and your GameCube turned on, you should get a little something like this. And right here we are in Swiss. So as you can see, all of our games are here that we can select. This boot is the Swiss image file, and this right here is our GC Loader update. So to launch this, just like any other homebrew or game, you just highlight it and press the A button. Now as you can see, I'm on a outdated beta firmware, so to update, you simply press A to start the update process and let it do its thing. Now it didn't take all that long to do, and it's telling us to turn off the GameCube and then turn it back on, so that's what I'm going to do. Do not press the restart button, physically turn off the GameCube using the power button and turn it back on. And that is it. Updating a firmware is just as easy as that. So if you want to clear out your menu a little bit, you can delete this, which I'm going to do real quick. To do this, since we don't really need it now until we need another update, which you'll download the latest update as I showed before, just go over to your SD card, find the file we no longer need, and you can delete it out of here, and that's it, you're done. The cool thing is as well, that was technically a piece of homebrew, so for any type of homebrew you want to play, such as emulators and such, all you need to do is again copy it over to the SD card in the same fashion. It boots up like any other game. You can make separate folders if you want to, but I personally find it easier to just have everything immediately available when I boot up Swiss. So now that this is configured and updated, let's get to gaming. So another thing I want to show you all, when you are booting up your game, you can select your game, press the A button, and then press A to boot. However, Swiss has a bunch of really awesome settings that I recommend looking into by pressing the X button. Here it has some of the awesome stuff, which one of my favorite ones is being able to force games into 480p. And I recommend taking a look at all of these that are available and saving them as well too. One issue though that I do want to bring up that is happening right now, and I hope this won't be an issue for much longer, is right now, if you are using Swiss while I'm recording this, you are not able to save settings to the SD card itself on the GC Loader. So that means you're going to need to use something such as a SD Gecko or a SD2 SP2 with a FAT32 formatted micro SD card or SD card, so that way you can boot up all your games in Homebrew from the GC Loader, but you use the SD card in the SD2 SP2 or in the Gecko to save all of your settings to. Again, I'm hoping this is just a temporary setback, and I hope this is resolved here in the near future. The reason why this is being done right now is because at the current moment, utilizing write access to the GC Loader from Swiss is not available. So there we go, that's about it. We end up taking a stock Japanese Orange Spice GameCube. I installed a region mod in it, installed the GC Loader itself, and while I was there, I also decided to change the jewel from the stock jewel to this really cool Paper Mario one that Rocker Gaming ended up giving me. If you're interested in the jewels or in the region mod, I have separate videos covering the both of those. Again, between the GC Loader or the GC Loader plug and play, the setup and firmware updates for the SD card is the exact same. And I recommend if you get a GC loader and you install it, the first thing you do when you get it and have it installed successfully is you update the firmware in case your GC loader device is out of date. With that, what about my own personal thoughts on this? Well, this has been one of the easier installs that I have done. Yes, even with the flex cable. And seeing that plug and play come out, that makes me even happier because that makes something that's easy even easier to do and so much accessible to a lot of people who are just too afraid to pick up a soldering iron. And I understand where their fears come from. So that way it really kind of opens us up to anybody being able to install a GC loader. This Orange Spice GameCube is now my main GameCube that I play these games on. But I do also have my black GameCube, which I've modded up and I have a few extra things on there that plays the original discs. That way, if I have any discs that I'm feeling nostalgic for and I want to pick up off my shelf and play on the system itself, I can do that. And if I want to just quickly fire up something or just have a longer play session and not really worry about wearing down any hardware, I have my main GameCube, which is this Orange Spice one. And that's one big thing I want to recommend to people. If you are someone who's a physical collector, I recommend having at least 2 GameCubes, or maybe a GameCube and a Wii. Mainly just so you have a device that you can play your discs on, and then you have another device that you can have the GC loader installed on. Now, my personal experience with the GC loader so far, it's been nothing short of fantastic. I actually got into the first round of pre-orders, so I was like the first 125 people to end up ordering one. I got it, I installed it, it was quite easy as you're able to see right here, and even easier now thanks to the plug and play solution. And right off the bat, I ended up running the GameCube for at least 40 hours with the GC loader in there and haven't run into any sort of issues. The only major thing that is a little bit of a pain, so major, minor, however you want to detail it, is again that issue in which you cannot save Swiss settings or utilize Swiss patches using only the GC loader, due to the fact that Swiss is not able to save to the SD card that the GC loader utilizes. Again, I really hope that issue does get remedied here soon, but for the time being, I am using a SD2 SP2 in the GameCube itself, so that way I have all my Swiss settings saved to that, and I play all my games off the GC loader. Now some people might be asking, is the GC loader really that well worth it compared to the alternative methods? And I can answer absolutely. I haven't done any major speed tests or anything on here, but my buddy Rocker Gaming has been more than excited for the GC loader and has been doing tests on his own. And he is reporting that he's seeing at least 50% speed increases with loading and such on the GC loader compared to other options. Now the options for loading games on the GameCube, in my opinion from best to worst, are the GC loader, the DVD drive, and the SD Gecko or SD2 SP2. Those last two have really about the same speed on them. Since the system was designed to stream everything off the DVD drive, it's no surprise that that's going to be up there. But you do risk wearing out your laser as well as the rest of the disk drive. The SD2 SP2 and running things off of the SD Gecko are both fantastic solutions if you want to go diskless and stay on the GameCube. However, those are even slower than using the disk drive, and I myself have run into little issues with slowdown on FMVs and such. On top of that, the big thing is that those final options do not have full audio streaming support for your games, but the GC loader does. To summarize, the GC loader eliminates any type of risk of wearing out your disk drive or laser by completely replacing them. It's also the fastest option when playing your games and loading between maps and levels and all that fun stuff. And finally, it also supports full audio streaming, something that other diskless methods do not support. With those 3 major benefits, it's quite easy for me to say that the GC loader is probably the first mod you should do on a GameCube if you're getting into GameCube modding, probably the last mod you're going to do on your GameCube, and without a doubt, the best mod you can do for a GameCube. Anyways, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated, and if you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too.